Welcome. You are now linked to your telecom retirement.
Hey, how we doing today? It's um the last couple of days going to work has been an adventure. My town tends to be really good at announcing major construction projects via Facebook, via their Facebook page. And they'll say, hey, we're doing this work, we're doing that work. And suddenly this month they decided to stop doing that. And both Monday and Tuesday of this week, I'm doing my regular drive to work, which I'm cutting across town diagonally, which is a major thoroughfare. It's not major streets, but this travel route is heavily traveled. Um, they're what I call scarifying the pavement. I don't think that's a New England term anymore. It was at one point. They're grinding the pavement. They're shaving it down. Whatever they call that in your area. I call it scarifying, which I think is a New York term. But yeah, they're just grinding down the pavement to put a new surface coat on. And instead of trying to get some traffic one way and then some traffic the other way, they just closed one direction off. And it was the southbound direction where I was going. So 2 days in a row, I had roadblocks that there was no notice. It was, I came around a corner on a T intersection and you can't turn left. You have to turn right. Well, right doesn't get me where I want to go, like not even close. If you had told me a turn ago, I would have gotten around. It was a pain in the neck. It was a roadblock to me getting to work, and I was 5 minutes late both days. And now there's someplace else with the pavement grinding, so I'm good to go. But I want to talk about roadblocks to our retirement because I've bumped into a bunch of people this year, more so than I have in the last couple of years, that have had some late roadblocks to retirement. With this roadblock, traffic-wise, my son just started driving. He just got his license about 2 months ago, and he drives to school. And he was behind me, probably like by 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm texting him using Apple CarPlay, so I don't think try to type, because I don't type when I drive. I don't do that because that's scary. But letting him know that there's a roadblock, you're not going to be able to get through. Here's how you're going to get around it. And he's familiar enough with driving in town that he figured it out. But these roadblocks come up, and they're late in retirement roadblocks. And I want to tell a couple of stories around them, because the stories seem to kind of hit home for people more than anything, is to kind of illustrate, be mindful of these, because sometimes you just don't see them. And it's silly stuff sometimes. I'll give you a good, for instance, is I have a client, great client, and they've been clients for 25 years. He was an active, at the time, 9X employee. It's going to be 28 years now that I think about it. He was a lineman, and they spent a lot of money on their kids and enjoying life, and there was nothing wrong with it. They did their savings. He was putting 16% in his 401k, and God bless him for doing so. And he hit retirement age. He was actually one of those folks that retired and came back. He left Verizon at the time, received a retirement offer, and got hired back for training. And he trained for a couple of years, and then he left that job, and he was working for traffic signal company, training them on proper things dealing with the cones and everything when you're doing work in traffic, because they were a traffic light company, and they'd have to go out and repair, and training their guys how you set your cones, what you want it to look like, how far off into and out of the road you want to be with your vehicles, and things like that. He had that, and then he was a chauffeur driver for a while, believe it or not. He had a bunch of different jobs, but when he got kind of close to retirement, he came to me, and I had been to his house 20 years prior, and it looked fine. He had, I don't know, about $150,000 worth of repair work that he had to do on his house. It was massive, replacing windows. The floor that I had sat in his living room, and their living room floor was unfinished 20 years prior, was still unfinished. It was still bare plywood at the time. There was a bunch of stuff that he just ignored. And all of a sudden at retirement, Now it was time to fix it all. And that was a big problem. We had to work around it. He actually wound up working part-time a little bit longer than he wanted to make it happen. And thankfully we were able to find a way around it. But be aware of that is that can be dangerous, is if you're kind of delaying those just maintenance and upkeep tasks that I'll get to that when I retire. Well, it's nice to have the time to do so, but it's just as important to have the assets to do so. Uh, Another gentleman, again, another Verizon employee, I think he retired from Verizon. This was tough. Is his roadblock, and he never saw it. Is he came to me right before he was planning on retiring. He was management, um, and we sat down, him and his wife and I, and this is going to be 15, 18 years ago, something like that. And I'm looking over their financial documents, and they have a house at the time. It was probably worth, let's call it $350,000. He had a mortgage of like $280,000, which was close to the maximum you could get. And I said, "Huh? Did you just buy this house?" "Oh no, that's the house we raised the kids in. We've lived there for 25 years." "Huh? Do, do you have a second house that you used this?" "No, no, that's it." I said, "All right. Explain to me how almost 80% of your home value is in this mortgage." And he goes on to explain that he used that to, uh, he borrowed money with a home equity to pay for the college education for the kids, which a lot of people of that generation did. That was what you did 25, 30 years ago versus today, where you take out student loans. You took out a home equity. He said, and then rates went down a little bit and I rolled it into my mortgage. He said, while I did that, I took the cars and rolled that in the mortgage because I could keep the payment lower. And there was some money on the credit cards and I rolled that in as well. I said, all right. He said, then about 4 or 5 years later, we did some work on the house. We had another home equity. Um, we bought some new cars again, and we had some more money on credit cards, and then rates went down, and we decided to consolidate everything again. So we got a new 30-year mortgage with the old mortgage balance and the home equity for the repairs and the two car loans and the credit cards. He's like, and that was 3 years ago. So I've got 27 years left. What's the problem? And that was the problem. That was the problem, is he had this super massive mortgage payment that he just never thought about. He never, that was his roadblock, was we had to solve this housing issue because he couldn't afford to pay that mortgage and retire simultaneously. And thankfully, we were able to do so. We had a big upswing in property values right after that. So he was able to sell at a good price. He ended up moving to out of state to a different market where he bought a lot more house for a lot less money, and it worked out. But that's a gigantic roadblock of, if you're not paying attention to the amount of money you have in uh, in debt, it can get you into real trouble later on. And those are more for, if you're listening to this, more for if you're younger, in your 40s, maybe early 50s. These are the things you think about. Uh, One of the ones, and I had a personal connection to this. It was I didn't know it at first. It didn't dawn on me until I saw the guy's address. And this is going back a number of years. So I was in my 20s at the time, and I was meeting with this director in Boston, um, who was thinking about retiring at the time. He was in his late 50s, early 60s, something like that. And I looked at his address, and I mean, that he had a very Irish last name. Go figure. Massachusetts, an Irish last name. I'm shocked. Common Irish last name. So I didn't think anything of it until I saw his address. And I said, "Oh, I know this guy." Um, and he was from a 1960s good Catholic marriage. So I think they had 8, somewhere around that, kids, lots of kids. And uh, again, I think the youngest was a year older than me, I believe. So all of his kids were older. One of them went to school with my brother, but there was 6 or 8 of them, and they all went to private school. for college. Every single one of them went to some sort of private school, whether it was BU, BC, Northeastern, something of that caliber of private school for all 6 to 8 of them. It must have been 6, but it was a lot. And I've talked about this in a previous podcast about what it would cost for my parents. My first year at Bentley in 1987 was, I think, about $10,000. So he spent 40 grand times 6. Let's just say on average, um, at a time when that was 3 times the cost of a house, maybe. It was a lot of money. So he made some good decisions. He made some really good decisions uh, about educating his kids at a time when it took, versus today, it was very affordable. But all he had left at the end, he never bothered to look. He never bothered to see the roadblock coming. He had a small amount in his 401k, which at the time was called the savings plan. Uh, and his pension. His pension was decent because he was director level, but it wasn't nearly what his income was at the time. Let's say he was making maybe $120,000 at the time, and his pension was maybe 40. Where was the rest of that money going to come from? He wasn't putting a lot in the 401k, so he was taking a lot of it as income. That's one of those issues that we see is a big roadblock. One of the ones, I actually don't have an example for this one. I can't, because it happens so often. I can't think of one specific answer. Is the exact opposite. It kind of happened in this gentleman's case. Is one of the roadblocks is higher spending. Is looking at a situation where the kids graduate, they leave, house is paid off, or house is mostly paid off on a mortgage that's fairly old, and all of a sudden the bills that were there before aren't there anymore. I hope that you're saving that money. And that's a big issue for a lot of people in their 50s is they have this expense creep while not paying a monster mortgage payment as a percentage of my income anymore. As my income has gone up, my mortgage payment has stayed level, and my children no longer live at home and they're not eating my food anymore, and I'm not educating them, so I'm not spending tens of thousands of dollars on their education anymore. Let's take that money and spend it on, and they start ticking off a whole bunch of things: second home, vacations galore, all sorts of other stuff. And it's not just a single event. It's not like that the client I was talking about that did $100,000 worth of repairs to their home. It's a recurring year after year after year after year after year expense. And that's something you have to be very careful, because it's easy because nobody's sitting there next to you making sure that you're saving that money. I was talking with a new client just yesterday about he's had a bunch of different jobs. He's a referral of a telephone worker. He's a brother of a telephone worker, and he's had a bunch of different jobs in his industry. And he was showing we're consolidating his old 401ks, and he was talking about. He said this company was the first time I'd ever seen that signing up for the 401k was like mandatory. You had to actually do work to get out of it. I said, oh yeah, not only that, I said it's actually built in so that it'll go up every year. He goes, yeah, I saw that. It's like they're forcing me into savings. Exactly. It's the exact same situation, but in reverse, to help you as opposed to harm you. Is all of a sudden, by bumping those savings up, it just happens automatically and it just works for you. And when you retire, you have so much more money than if you thought about it yourself. Same thing with these expenses is they'll just creep up on you because you think, well, I'm doing the regular savings I was doing before, and I just happen to have all this extra money. I get to spend it. You want to be very careful of that. I think the biggest one we see here relates to our kids, not just that one client in the town I grew up in with his 6 to 8 children, educating them. It's all the other stuff. I can't tell you where I heard this, so it's not a fact. It's just my opinion at this point, but I did hear it or read it recently that 56% of 18 to 25-year-olds live with their parents. And that's like, wow. Um, I remember again, 80s, early 90s, you couldn't get me out of there fast enough. Get me out of here. I want to go live my life. I want to be on my own. I want to do my thing. And it's not like I hated my parents. I love my parents. It was just, it was time. And we've done a great job of making life comfortable for our kids. And this is the biggest roadblock I bump into. And that's the 3 or 4 times in the last 5 months I've bumped into this specific roadblock of people that are caring for their adult children. And why do we do this? Is what is it about ourselves or our society that causes it? And I think it's a couple of different things. First of all, we don't know what being poor is. More than likely, if you're listening to this podcast and you're over the age of, say, 50, you grew up somewhat quote unquote poor, or there was definitely a whole lot of people ahead of you in line. Uh, my family wasn't poor. We were middle class and we didn't want for a whole lot, but things were tight, especially at times. Um, I remember when we moved back from Cleveland to Massachusetts, uh, I was in second grade and my parents were trying to buy a house. I remember this vividly. And I had, I don't know, $1.38 in change in a cigar box. And I came downstairs and it must have been, was it summer? It was a vacation day. It wasn't a Saturday. My dad was at work. I know this. And I came down and I know my parents, we were living in an apartment. We had just moved back. They were trying to find a house and they were struggling with the finances and all of that. And I came downstairs with my $1.38 and handed the whole cigar box to my mother. And she was just, crying. She was crying and gave it back to me and said, "We got this. We've got this." So, there was a struggle there. And my kids have never seen that struggle. I've tried to give them that struggle on their own, but they've never seen it. And I think I've been somewhat successful. So we don't know. Uh, we kind of saw, again, my generation and above kind of saw difficulty. You want to see difficulty? Go to a third world country. Go to a lot of Latin America, South America, uh, places like that. Go to the Caribbean and see. You have these beautiful resorts. I remember when I got married, we went to Jamaica, which at the time was relatively safe. Uh, Boy, they lived a different life than I did. That kind of gave me a wake up call of, yeah, I'm 22 and broke, and I'm trying to start my own business, but I'm not living in a shack made out of cinder blocks with no electricity or minimal electricity and no air conditioning and no heat. That they need heat down there, and no running water. Waters go over there and go get it. Yeah, big change. We live in a spectacular society here in the U.S., and we like to talk about the income gap or the wage gap or the wealth gap between the really rich and us. And we don't get it that us versus the rest of the world, there's that big of a chasm. There is that big of a chasm between what we have and what they have. So we have a lot of resources. So because of that struggle that you and I saw, it's hard to let our children go through that same struggle. It's hard to look at them and say, it's okay. Because my parents, and definitely their parents, uh, they didn't let us struggle when we were early adults. It wasn't about letting us. It was, there wasn't a choice. They didn't have the resources to provide it. As I see, my parents with me and my brother versus my little sister. And my brother's probably laughing. My brother listens to this podcast religiously. My little sister, who's 6 years younger than me, it was at that point that my father, it finally dawned on my father that he was doing okay financially. And boy, did she reap the benefits of that. It's like she had a very different teenage to adulthood life than me and my older brother did. Because my dad finally, oh, okay, everything's going to be okay. And I get it. And that I'm not, but yeah, is our situation was our parents did not have those resources to give us, even if they wanted to. My parents helped us out a bit when we bought our house, and I was eternally thankful. They helped us out a bit. Me and my wife paid for the vast majority of our wedding. We took a small amount of money from my parents, a small amount of money from her parents, and we did everything ourselves. We built it up ourselves. We saved the money. We planned everything. It was our decisions. It was a big deal. And it's hard. Again, our parents didn't have a choice. What if you do have a choice? What if you have those resources? If you have kids, my gosh, I don't care if they're 25 or 5. I remember my girls struggling at 5, looking out the window and watching them play with the kids in the neighborhood. Um, and not every encounter goes well. And watching their struggle of, oh, these two are now quote unquote best friends and they're going to exclude my child. And there's nothing I can do about it. I can't go out there and tell those two that they're being, mean, fat, jerky faces. I can't do that. I've got to watch that child go through that struggle. And it brings back the struggle I felt at that age with the same exact thing happening to me, because every kid goes through it, because it's not just, you're not the one picked on every day your entire life. There are times when you're picked on, times when you're not. Even the best guy in high school, the captain of the football team was harassed at one point, was bullied, was ignored, was whatever. We've all experienced that. It's something that we've done together as a society. That same feeling when your kids struggle financially and you go, I could solve this problem for them. I could fix this if I wanted to. Do I fix it? And I will tell you, as a guy that is an expert at finances, I have that struggle still to this day. It doesn't go away. It doesn't go away, but we got to make smart choices, not just for our children, but also for ourselves. So let me impart a little wisdom on that. Is letting your adult children struggle is good for them. It is good for them. You can always be there with the safety net later, but let them struggle first. The added benefit is the odds are they're going to be okay. The odds are they're going to figure it out. And those resources that are supposed to be for your retirement don't get spent on them now and just kind of vaporize, because someday you are going to hit retirement. Someday you are going to be in that situation where you have to live on the assets that you've accumulated. And if you've spent them on your children, you don't have any. I have a situation right now with a client who left and came back. In this situation, it's tough. I'm not blaming her. Keep that in mind. I understand exactly where she's coming from, and I understand exactly the path that she went down. Divorced, and that makes it worse. If you're divorced, you're more inclined to help the kids, and I understand why. But 3 kids, I think 3 kids, and retired from Verizon, got a nice, generous retirement offer several years ago, and took that, and was supposed to go back to work and decided not to. She was going to take care of her grandkids. Okay. And then started spending into the principal of her retirement nest egg, which was her lump sum. She was very happy to get a lump sum pension buyout, plus her 401k, which wasn't as big as her pension buyout, which is a problem, and started spending into principal. And then I get a note one day, I think I'm all set with this. I'm going to take care of it myself. All right. And about a year ago, she came back and she said, I've made a terrible mistake. I need help. And almost all of it's gone. It's almost all gone. She's in her late 60s, maybe early 70s, I think late 60s. But she made all these decisions to help her struggling children during this certain time when they're all adults. They're all adult children. They're not 22 or 23. They're 32 or 33. And that money is gone. And I don't know what's going to happen to her next year or the year after when all she has left is Social Security. I'm not sure what is going to happen to her. I had a gentleman do that several years ago. He spent, gosh, that's going to be 15 years ago. He spent north of $100,000 on his son's wedding. He spent north of $100,000 on his son's wedding, just the wedding. He put everybody up. It was at some resort. He decided it wasn't fair for everybody to have to pay, so he covered everybody's stay at the resort for 2 days. He paid for all of the food, all of the drinks, open bar, all of the time. He paid for everything. And a year and a half later, he was out of money at the age of probably 66 or 67. Don't do that. Please don't do that. So I know it's hard. I know it's hard. And it's hard to watch your kids struggle. Trust me. I as a parent, I know you want the best for your kids, but we want to be careful that the amount of money we're paying out is not hurting us twice. It's not hurting us by not letting our kids grow, because that struggle that you and I dealt with because our parents didn't have the resources made us stronger people, made us better people. They're adults now. Your adult children are adults. It's not your job to take care of them, which my older two mentioned to me every once in a while when I tell them, not big, but a small something. It's like, can I take care of that? No. And I'm so proud of them when they do that. No, you cannot take care of that. Hon, I want to. Nope. No. We're adults. We can take care of this. It was probably, all right, confession time. I'll give you the one area I have a weakness at. It took me a long time. I'm going to say it was within the last 4 years. So my daughters are 25 and 27, I think, something like that. Yeah, 25 and 27. It was within the last 4 years I let somebody else pay for dinner if we went out. Like, they'd take me out. Dad, can we go out? Just the two of us go out to dinner? Sure. Check would come. I would keep the check. Dad, I took you out. I know. I got this. That was my weak area. Within the last 4 years, I allow them to pay. It's like, this is important for them and it's helping them grow. It took me a while. It took me a while to get this whole same lesson I'm telling you. So don't think that I'm talking from a perfect place. I'm talking from experience. So that's it. That's what I have for you today. Couple of stories, little advice as a parent. If you're not a parent, pass this along to your parent, to other parents that you know people that have kids. If you don't, if you have questions, jump down in the show notes, get a hold of us. Make sure whatever podcast system you're on, hit that like button, give us a 5-star review if you can. Share it with others. We're always trying to get more listeners to help out with these tidbits of advice to as many people as possible. And I will see you next time. Stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to Your Telecom Retirement with your host, Dennis O'Keefe. Please click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. You can find information for Dennis, our guest, or resources mentioned in today's episode in the show notes. The information in this podcast is for educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Every individual situation is different. You should consult an expert before making any changes to your financial situation. For more information, please see our disclosure information at www.successfulmoney.com.